You asked some really good questions that I've been answering. I've been talking to a bunch of press like the last couple of weeks, and your questions have been really fun because they're just totally different. I didn't expect some of these questions, so I had to think.
Hi, I'm Dax, and this is What's Under the Bed, where I interview filmmakers, actors, and guests about horror movies. In this episode, I interview horror director BJ McDonnell. We talk about 80s horror, life in a punk rock band, and his new movie, Studio 666. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell to know when a new episode drops. If there's someone you think I should interview, please let me know in the comments. Now, enjoy my talk with horror filmmaker BJ McDonnell. Would you like to start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Awesome. So it is amazing to talk with you, and so I'm going to talk for the audience. You are a filmmaker, a director, as well as a longtime cameraman and Steadicam operator for more than 100 movies. You've worked with some of Hollywood's biggest directors, and since we focus on horror here, can I list off some of your credits in that genre?
Yeah, go for it.
You were camera operator on 5 movies with Rob Zombie, including Devil's Rejects and both Halloweens. You were part of several films in the Conjuring series, including Conjuring 3, both Annabelle sequels, and The Nun. And I hear you have a remake of Salem's Lot coming out.
We do. It's going to be rad.
It's going to be
awesome.
Yeah. You were director on the Repentless Trilogy for the metal band Slayer, and you worked on the insanely fun Hatchet series and directed its 3rd installment, Hatchet III, with 2 of my favorite actors, Kane Hodder and Danielle Harris.
I thought you were going to say Derek Mears.
Now, your movie Studio 666 drops this month. It's a mix of genres. It has comedy, rock, and horror, and it stars the Foo Fighters and has you directing. Can you tell us what it's about?
Not going into too much detail, but it's basically if a band's going to go find this place to record that has a very cool sound in a house, then they want to find something that's very unique. So they end up talking to basically their manager, and he basically gets them into a house that has some folklore behind it of a band from the 90s that some things didn't work out so hot for them. So they end up going to the house, and when they get there, they hear the sound in the room. It's awesome. And they start trying to record, and then bad things start happening without me saying much, but that's where you go. That's what happens, especially when you're a band in a spooky house.
Yeah. You played bass guitar in a punk band called 57 Licks before becoming a filmmaker. So Hatchet III, it has a great soundtrack. Your work with Slayer and now Studio 666 with Foo Fighters, how big a role has music played in your experience?
The thing is, before I did films, my grandfather was an old actor who used to take me as a kid to sets, and that's kind of what started my love of filmmaking. Just going from where I kind of came from. Me and my buddies would make home movies, make some cool action movies, run around the backyard with the VHS camera, just doing all sorts of stupid stuff, ketchup, blood, chocolate syrup, and just blowing things up when we could. After I got into the music scene, in a really young age, I was always a metalhead kid growing up when I was really young. And then I kind of during the early 90s, punk rock kind of had a revival. And so I got really heavy into punk rock, and that's what I got into the band. So I toured for about 7 years with these guys going all over the US. And then as things have it, band members sometimes just don't get along after the long haul and call it quits. So I decided to move back to LA or move to LA and, go to film school and see if I could get into a career of making movies, since I loved doing that so much as a kid. Music to me, going into the whole music thing, when I'm writing stuff or I'm trying to get an idea in my head about what a movie is I want to do, I listen to a lot of film scores actually. And I also listen to a lot of heavy metal. And it just depends on the tone of what the idea is that you're trying to do, what you're what's in your head at that point. Like if I'm trying to think of something really big and theatrical, I usually tend to go to more like Hans Zimmer type scores, John Williams, that kind of stuff. If it's going into like, say, the Slayer realm or something that's like, I think it's going to be totally insane and crazy, and I want to have that vibe, then metal always goes hand in hand with that. I love going into that realm and really pumping myself up that way. It just gets me in the mode of like, puts my mind in the mindset of what I'm trying to write and accomplish. But also in these movies and these things, knowing how, back to your question, how, I know how the music business works. I know what instruments are what. I know like the names of all, the drum heads and the cymbals and I've been on tour a bunch. So I think when you're dealing with bands and you're doing stuff with bands, you can relate more to them. And you can have more to talk about because you actually have been in that world a little bit. Maybe not as successful, but you at least have something to talk about. And you get the idea of what it takes to make a record or how they do it.
So your band performed in Pensacola, Florida, where you grew up. Mm-hmm. Were you born in Florida?
No, I was born in Van Nuys, California. And I was here with my family until I was about 5 years old. And then my dad got a job in Pensacola at the naval base doing civil service down there. He would make like, screws for like, Apollo missions and Apache helicopters and stuff like that. And so we relocated down there where my grandmother's family is also from. And I basically grew up in that, from like age 5 to 24. Basically, I was in Florida, but I toured a lot around the US in my late teens. So I started getting a little bit more world renowned of like what was out there, and I'd also go to like, as a young kid, I'd fly to California and stay with my grandparents and like, go to film sets or go see movies. And they had a huge influence on me.
So I have a question. May I show you something I have from Foo Fighters?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
My dad and my mother got this years ago, and it's the band, and they all signed it. We also have Gus. Yeah, Gus. Yeah.
That's so funny. I saw that. Gus. Yeah, we can talk about Gus all day. He's an old friend of mine.
Well, that was actually my next question. Did your paths ever cross?
Funny. Well, yeah, no, that's the funny thing about how all this was. So my old punk band in Pensacola, Florida, Gus basically was in charge of booking all these shows in Pensacola. He would bring the bands in. This is like before the Foo Fighters stuff and before the Nine Inch Nails tour management that he did and any of those kind of things. So in order to find opening local acts, there was only a few punk bands in Pensacola. It was Lick 57, my band. There was Blunt. There was a band called Jim Crack, another band called Wooden Horses, a couple of other ones, but those were the main ones. So Gus always would be like, he'd kind of pair our bands up to be the opening acts of all these bands from out of town, like to be the opening acts. So I knew Gus when I was a teenager. And he was always like helping our band out, hey, Sam I Am's coming. You guys want to open up for them? Yeah, that'd be awesome. We opened up for like Pennywise and, we opened up for The Offspring and AFI and Swingin' Utters. And I mean, I can name all these bands that he brought into town, Lagwagon. And so it was funny because he was the main dude. And then, after a while, like, he took off, started doing tour managing with the Foo Fighters, and, we were all excited for him and didn't see him for the longest time. And then I moved to California, started working in the film business. And every now and then I'd see Gus like at shows. Like I'd go see a band play out here in LA and I'd be like, oh my God, Gus, what's up? So I'd see him every now and then. And then it's funny because then this whole Foo Fighters thing came up and, he came to the set and we were, it's such a small world, that's like 20 something years or more of like knowing Gus Brandt. And he's a great guy. He's always been so nice and so great and always believed in us,
Well, speaking of how the Studio 666 happened, how did this project come out to be?
So there's two producers that work with Dave all the time, Jim Rhoda and John Ramsey, and they did Sound City, Sonic Highways. They usually do a lot of Dave's stuff, and the Foo Fighters stuff. They do the music videos or anything that's kind of audio visual with Dave. They kind of put it together and work with him on it. I was working with them on a pitch for another movie for a while, and just never kind of, came to fruition. And and Jim Rota called me and said, hey, Dave has this idea. He wants to do a horror film. He doesn't want to direct it. He wants to find a horror director. So what if I send you the pitch and you read it and tell us what you think? So I was like, yeah, man, that'd be awesome. So he sent me the pitch. I read what Dave wanted to do, and then I kind of got on my computer and I started making a lookbook of things that I thought would be really interesting to add to the movie. In the script, I thought would add a little bit more depth into what he wanted to do, and just a little bit more like intense, subject in what he wants to do. So I did this lookbook, ended up getting a meeting with Dave, went over to the house where they were recording Medicine at Midnight, where we actually shot the movie, set down the lookbook. We went through the things. We talked about, directors he likes, movies he likes, things that I like, directors I like, and also talking, then we started talking about the vibe of what we wanted to go for, how we wanted this film to feel. And, from then on, we just really vibed and got along really well and really enjoyed each other's ideas. And that was it. I got hired right there, and we went into pre-pro, and away we went, started gathering all the troops.
So how was your approach different directing actors in movies like Hatchet III versus directing like Foo Fighters in Studio 666?
Well, Hatchet 3, I had, like actors, I had that's what they do. That's all they do. In Studio 66, I had more musicians. So there's a big difference there. The good thing about 666 is that I also have a mix of professional actors in the movie too. So, with something like Hatchet, I didn't have to worry about like the continuity of things for the most part, because they're actors. They know like, oh, if I have this gun in my right hand, it's always got to be in my right hand, can't be here. Like continuity and hitting their marks and doing that kind of stuff. So I had to kind of do a different approach with Studio 666. And it was almost like kind of in the first couple of weeks, like, showing the guys like, oh, no, you have to keep this in this hand because it won't match if we go to editing, or, you have to hit that mark, or it's because it doesn't work. And we kind of had to do like a little bit of a trial thing there. And so I let the guys play themselves in Studio 666. I didn't tell them like to try to build a character really, because they're playing themselves. So who plays a better character than yourself, And so I think that also eased down like any anxiety of actually having to speak and do dialogue and like perform, is the fact that they could be themselves and really have fun with it. And that's kind of how I approach that.
Hi, I'm Dax, and this is What's Under the Bed, where I interview filmmakers, actors, and guests about horror movies. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell to know when a new episode drops. If there's someone you think I should interview, please let me know in the comments.